Welcome everyone to another installment of the Patch Manager. I don't think we can stop talking about this, can we, Chris?
Well, you know, I figured I woke up this morning, D-Bach and I are in the studio, we got to be talking about Patch Manager.
Gotta be.
That's what we do.
Gotta be.
All right, so we're going to drop number 4 on you. When we're talking about Patch Manager, gotta always pitch our blueprint here. All the information that you ever need to know about Patch Manager is going to be here. This webinar, once it's recorded, it's going to be added to this. So if you bookmark this, it'll always be at your disposal. Anytime we add new information, it's going to be linked straight to here. So got to give a little plug out for the blueprint. Absolutely. Because it's going to be your one-stop shop for all things patch management.
Love the logical layout in it too. It's exactly the way you look at everything in the Patch Manager, so it's easy to follow.
It's like we had an idea why we built it.
It's crazy.
You know? It's weird.
Crazy.
It's weird. All right, today what we're going to talk about is we're going to focus on our patching groups. Our 4th installment, we had a lot of questions about, hey, how do I get up and running relatively quickly? How do I set up my groups to have this logical kind of way to just kind of get started and kind of customize this? So we're going to kind of spend the first few minutes talking about that. Quick setup guide, show you a quick way to kind of limit your groups and kind of get that up and running. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about our default group. So we're going to create a default approval policy. We're going to lay that baseline that I want across all my devices. And we want to talk a little bit about that default policy and how we're going to use that requires routine approval that's going to let me know, hey, for my default policy, I have some patches I need to make a decision on, because we don't want to leave that with any patches that don't have a classification. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that actually does. Lastly, we're going to dive into third-party patching, just a little bit of how to create those policies and how to apply the version control with that. And we've had a lot of questions about third-party patching. Once again, we got to reiterate that this doesn't come out of the box with LabTech 11, or Automate 11, my bad. Automate 11. Yes. It's got to be a separate policy. Talk to your account manager. You can get that integrated. We just want to talk a little bit about how that differs. Creating the actual policy is the same for third-party updates where I pick the day. So we're going to talk about just creating the policies to assign to your various groups. So we're just going to spend a little time on that.
And basically that third-party patching, that's just our rebranded AppCare, right? So those who were on AppCare before can go to their account managers and kind of work with moving over from AppCare into the third-party patching as well.
Yeah, and if you're waiting in line for Automate 11 and you are an AppCare partner, you can get an early release and just say, hey, I want the new one. It'll automatically cycle over to the new version, so we'll get you up and running. So before we go into there, let's kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about the policy priorities that we have, because the biggest confusion that we've seen coming into the Patch Manager is how do I, kind of organize this priority, and how do I kind of dictate what I get applied from the Patch Manager. And we're going to talk about the update policies and the reboot policies, and that is determined by the place in that grid. As soon as I open up the configuration, I'm on that group section, how everything lays out is very important, especially when I'm talking about my update and reboot policies. The lower in the grid is higher priority, so everything at the bottom is going to have the highest priority. And the flip side, anything at the top is going to be the lowest priority. And we're only going to be concerned about the priority when I'm talking about my Microsoft updates, my third-party updates, and my reboot updates. How they are applied, or how I see them in the group, is how they're going to get applied to the agent. So I got to know what that means. And a quick glance here, when I'm looking at that group structure, anything at the top is going to have the lowest priority, anything at the bottom is going to be my highest priority. And I'm really only talking about these things here. When I'm sectioning out all of my groups, I'm putting my install groups at the bottom, and you can see that I'm going to apply all of my update policies and my reboot policies down here below. And I'm going to put them in the order I want them applied. VM host is going to have a higher priority than any workstation or any servers, anything where I have dual roles. I want to make sure the most important role is actually getting the policy I want applied. So again, very important when we're talking about update and reboot policies, the order in the grid determines how those policies get assigned. When we talk about how we order our grid, is going to make a lot more sense moving forward. Now we're going to switch gears. So we have our update reboot policies, and those are controlled by the placement in the grid. Now I have my approval policies. These are the classifications of my actual patches. All right. These are controlled mainly by that classification. Because we're going to have agents that are going to have a number of approval policies applied to them, so we only care about the classification of that patch. And the priority is based on the approval classification. They go like this. Not set is going to be the lowest priority. Obviously, I have a new patch show up. It's not going to have a priority. It's going to be at the bottom.
On it really, so.
Then I'm going to have ignore. That's going to trump my not set. Then I have my approve. That's going to trump my ignore and my not set. Next to last is remove. Hey, again, going to trump my approve, ignore, not set. And my trump card is always going to be my deny. So these how they get applied. So it doesn't really matter how I have them structured in my grid when I'm using my approval policy, because it's always going to go to that classification of the patch. So very important. That's why I section off. Hey, all of my install groups are going to be at the bottom. All my approval policies are going to be at the top. It's just a logical order. Helps me kind of see everything that's going on, and I can make sense of it.
And I know originally you developed this for a lot of those people coming over from the old Ignite patching.
Exactly.
And kind of making it make sense for them. But even for me, from a standpoint, I don't have really any experience with the old Ignite management. But just having that organization and actually sectioning these basically off by the types of priority they have really makes it a lot more scalable for me as I'm building out and I'm going to add things in later. It just makes more sense.
Because that's what we had to come up with, this recommended practice to kind of say, all right, for everybody that used to do it this way, what's the logical way? Well, this matches up with that. And hey, I have somebody that's never used Ignite. I've been using patch management for a little over 4 years now, so I know how they all tie together, so I had to kind of come up with a way that kind of solve both of them. Hey, it's logical for him, it's logical for me, should be logical out there. Now here we have an example which kind of proves my point, and so everybody can kind of get on the same page. So here I have a patch, and you know what, policy A, B, C, or D, I could have multiple classifications of this patch on various policies. But it doesn't matter how many policies I have this patch classification for, because it's only going to go by that trump sequence. So here I have A and B are ignore, C deny, and D is approve. So it doesn't matter how many times I set the classification for this patch. It doesn't matter, because always it's going to go by that classification. So I could have 100 different policies. It could be ignored 90 of them. It could set to install on 9 of them. Still, that one deny is going to trump everything. So patch is denied by policy C since it has the highest priority. So understanding these priorities and how they're getting applied, we got to break it down. My update and reboot policies, it's in the order of the grid. My approval policies, it only matters about the classification of the patch. That's paramount for understanding patch management. Getting everything set up is just kind of getting those two concepts, kind of getting my brain wrapped around those concepts, and everything starts to fall in place after that. Because now, all right, I have my policies, I have everything set up. Now I just need to structure it where it makes sense. And you can kind of see here where the main thing I want to see on this screenshot is, well, here approvals, denies, they're at the top. But one thing I can notice real quick is Microsoft Update Policy, third party, reboot. I don't have anything up here at the top. All right, I'm not controlling approvals and denies here. You can see my approval policies are getting shown here. And let me just blow that up in just a second. But here's also where I can change our priority and move my groups around and kind of fill in the gaps when I need to. So from here, hey, if I need to move a group up or down wherever I want to make it logical, I have the ability to do that. So I have a screenshot here where when everything comes in, it's all over the place. If I need to reorg any of this stuff, well, I highlight that group and I move it up and down with these arrows. If I have some default groups that I don't need, I can remove them. I can do that here. If I need to create a new group, I can do that here. If there's something in my navigation tree, I can add it here. All of that stuff is going to be here. So I can stay in the patch manager and I can do probably 90% of my configurations from here. Everything's going to be right here. So I can move it, I can cater it around. When mine first came in here, where you see the screenshot, hey, it didn't look like this. I had to move my groups around to have it make sense because I brought in a bunch of policies and I wanted everything to kind of organize. So I moved everything up to where it made sense for me and I have it all structured out. So here's where I blow up my two different versions. So here up at the top, this is just the top half where I have my approvals and my denies. And here you can see I don't have any update or reboot policies. I have approval policies that I have set on my default, and then I have my denies where the only policies I have, well, deny 9, hey, I have a policy that just denies that patch. But this approvals default is going to be where I assign my baseline. So this is going to be where I have all my agents in here. So every single agent that I have in my system, they're going to be here. And I'm going to assign a policy that's going to be my baseline. Hey, for all of my devices, I want to set a baseline where I want all these patches here across the board. Maybe for me, it's all my critical updates. Maybe it's my important updates. Maybe it's definitions. I don't care. I define my baseline, and I use this because it's going to go out to all my devices. So I set that here. Boom, done. Any overrides I want for workstations and servers, I have the ability to do that here. And then again, I have all my denies down there. They do one job. Again, this only goes by the classification of the patch. So I can override it, I can see it, I can make sense of it. Hey, they're getting here. Do I have any overrides for workstations and servers? Hey, I can look at it, and it's very easy to understand. It's all right here in front of me, flat and square.
And once again, that's going to offer that scalability, because if you just start making policies per maybe location or something like that, and you're repeating the same classifications on the same ones or very similar policies, then all we're doing is we're processing that same policy over and over, when we could just baseline it and it's all spread throughout globally. Now we can start working on exceptions underneath that.
Because what I see a lot is people are like, well, I'll just bring all these clients and I'll assign the same policy to each client. Well, I have this, okay, but it's going to be assigned multiple places. Well, what I'm doing is when it processes, hey, I'm going to apply the patches here, and then I'm going to apply the patches here, and I'm going to apply that. It's going to apply the same policy over and over. It's just going to tax my server because it's got to go through every group. If I set that baseline and say, hey, everybody's going to have this, all right, cool, I have that out of the box, I can come in and I can add exceptions. So we don't make it the rule, we make it the exception. Hey, I'm going to set that baseline and I'm going to continue on from there. Now I can get everything cleaned up because this is all nice and pretty. So how do I get this to look like your screen when I come in new, because mine doesn't look like that. It kind of looks like this, and I kind of want something like that. So that's pretty easy to do because we're going to pull in all the patching type groups. So if I were to go into my system and I'm coming in here and here's my group structure, and I have my patch manager, and you can see I have all these different groups and I don't really need them. I clear off all of my approval policies that I don't need, and then I come in here and Windows updates. These are my old school groups that if I'm new and I haven't used them in the past, and I don't know what these are used for, so I don't need them. I can kind of start off fresh. So here I can just switch this to organizational. Organizational has nothing to do with anything. It's just one of those types that is just used to kind of switch it from a different group that's not going to be used that often. I click save. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reload my system cache, so I make sure all of the subgroups are going to pull that classification. I come in here and I hit refresh, and boom, all of that clutter is now gone. Now I just have my default, my workstations, my servers, and any deny groups that I have. For me, I had a few different deny groups. You can see, only thing I'm working with here are a little bit of my approval groups, and I have my patch install groups that we build from default. That's it. And I can start clean, I can start fresh. Hey, you know what? Here's my defaults, here's my denies. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use the policies, I'm going to see the policies assigned, I'm going to use those, and everything is clean, and I can just kind of start with a fresh outlook and kind of go from here. If I need to bring in any of those groups, for whatever reason, I can always just import those, add existing group. They're still going to be in there. Let's say I wanted one of those deny groups, I can still bring them in, and it's much easier to start clean. All right, cool, I have a nice base.
And bring it in.
Now I can bring it in and I can add to it if I need to moving forward. But let's start off on the right foot. Let's kind of clear all the clutter out, and then from there, because if you try to organize all this at the beginning, it's a little overwhelming. I don't really know how to do it. So most people, what do they do? It's like, you know what, I'm just going to get rid of everything. I'm just going to do and create my own thing. So go ahead and clear the clutter. If I want to add it back, I can always do that after the fact. So real easy to do. Just switch the classification of that, and I go from this clutter to this real quick, and then I can start working from here and I can assign my policies.
Yeah. And the reason that's working is because, once again, we're only showing by default all the patching groups in here.
Yeah, and that's
so unless we've linked it, it's not going to be in there.
Because we're going to create some default groups that's in the actual patching group. Those are going to be the default ones that are loaded in there. And then we're going to bring in any of the patching groups. For my old school people, that's really where all of their stuff came from. Yeah. But now if I'm new, I can clean that out. Even if I'm not new, hey, I don't really use half of these. I don't know why I brought them over. Okay, let's start clean, and then I can add them back if I always need to. So these, you can see my approval policies. That's the only thing I'm worried about here. And then I have my other set of groups that we kind of bring in by default. These are my patch install groups that I always call because they start with patch install. And here's where I'm assigning my update and my reboot policies. Now, these are the ones where how they're listed here, they make all the difference in the world. This is where the priority of the group really takes hold. because as I'm putting them in here, that's how the policies are going to get set. So kind of look at it, it's like, well, if I have a server that's going to be my servers, because that's all my servers, it's a regular server, but it's also an Exchange server. Well, I don't want my Exchange server patching the same time as all my other servers. You know what? I'm going to isolate it, and I'm going to change the update policy to be different from anything there. So I put that lower in the group because my lowest priority is on top, my highest priority is on the bottom, and I can see everything right in front of me. This is really cool because, you know what, I don't have to jump in and check and see what policies assigned. I can see everything here. I can click on this group, see what servers are in there, and I know that policy is going to get assigned. I can click my VM host. Hey, all my VM hosts are in here. Hey, they're going to be outside of all these other policies because that's going to have the highest priority. So again, how I structure my group is critical to the ease in which I learn this and how I apply everything. And I break it out into 2 sections because it's easier for me. Hey, I do all my approvals and my denies on the top ones. Hey, I control my approval policies because they only care about the classification of the patch. And then down at the bottom, I put everything in the order in which I want them applied, and I only worry about my update and my reboot policies, and I'm ready to rock and roll. From there, once I have all this set up, now it's just, okay, I have it set up. Now how do I add stuff to it? How do I kind of customize this? Well, I already showed you one way. If I want to bring an existing group, all I do is I import it, and boom, I can pick it and I can add it to my list.
And I get that question all the time. Somebody always has a specific case, whether it be the way they want to break it down. They want to bring in a particular client, and their patching is a little unique from the rest of their clients, and they want to separate that out. And I'm like, well, this is why you start with that base that has the minimalist. Only put in what you need when you need it, and then that's going to help you scale that. So now we've got the exception. Let's bring it in.
Start that baseline and build from there. If you just try to tackle everything at once, you're going to get confused.
It gets overwhelming.
And, it gets overwhelming. So now, you know what? I want to start adding to this. So now I have my structure. It's exactly the way I want it. But you know what? I want to add another deny group because you know what? I don't want anybody to have, for this example, I'll use Skype because it's in there. How did I build that? Well, I have 2 different ways. I can build a group straight from here, and I can select the manual option. But you know what? This is automate. You know
I like to automate
we
things.
We don't do anything manually. So what I can do is I can select this auto join, and I can create my group and I can create my search straight from here. Now, one thing for my old school people that I want to kind of reiterate is you can still use extra data fields. You can still customize it. The little checkbox that I put on my agent, hey, for all my deny I-11, I check this box, it goes into the group, I assign my deny policy. That still works. And for 95% of it, I can do everything within the patch manager. The only thing I can't do within here is I have to build that checkbox outside of this, the patch manager. I have to still go back, and I got a screenshot. I still have to go in the dashboard, go to configuration, additional fields, and I have to build that extra data field where I put deny Skype, I make it a checkbox, I put it on my patching tab, it's on the computer. Hey, that allows me to select it on the agent, and it's going to auto-populate the search, and it's going to join the group, and I'm going to assign the policy. All of that still works. The only thing I can't do within the patch manager is create that extra data field. I still got to go in the dashboard. It takes like 5 minutes to build if you're kind of used to it, but all of that's right here. Once I have my extra data field built, then all I have to do is select that auto join, deny Skype, and then I can find that extra data field. Hey, deny Skype is true, which means it is checked, and I use that to populate my group. Easy peasy, build your groups, get them in order. You need to customize, you can import them. You need to build your own, you can do that. If you still want to use extra data fields, all of that functionality is still going to be the same. Search group policy is still how we're controlling everything. Everything is right here in front of you, ready to rock and roll.
And if you've never used an extra data field before, all you're really doing here is you're building an object in a database. We're giving you that ability to go ahead, put something, some kind of object in there that I can now utilize the search for and query against, just to bring up particular agents that I want to go ahead and flag. That's all we're doing here.
Yeah, instead of going to the database and knowing how to add that and update the SQL, on your own, you know what? Hey, build this right here, boom, ready to rock and roll.
And we'll give you the ability to go ahead and search for that later.
Yep. And if you want to take it up a notch, you can always create a script that checks and unchecks that by default.
Automate.
And I can right-click, run that on an entire client, so I don't have to open them all up. So once you start getting down this path, the options just start snowballing from there. You have everything there, but we just kind of want to take a step back, talk about an easy, quick way to set everything up, and kind of control it, ease your way into it after that.
Absolutely. Everything always builds up. Like even with that, go that step. Now we can even schedule it on the client. Maybe I don't want to right-click it all the time.
Yeah.
I just schedule it to
Let's
run
go
every
once
2
a
hours
day.
on the client.
Anytime I have a new agent, you know what? I'm just going to run this. I'm going to check the box. So again, automate, automate, automate.
Absolutely.
So now I have my group structure exactly the way I want it. So now I want to talk about a quick way to help remind me that I need to keep up to date on all my policies. And you can see I'm in my approval policy section here, and you can see from our other webinars that me personally, I blew up all the different approval policies that I can create. But I want to focus on the default. Now this default approval policy is the one I'm going to assign to my default approval group. Now, that approval default group is the one that I have all my agents in. And I talked about how I'm going to set a baseline. Hey, all of my agents, they got to have a minimum of all these patches. So I have the group built that has all the agents. Now I got to focus on the policy that I'm going to assign to that. And that's what I'm going to do here. So if I blow this up, you can see that I got a little asterisk by this. And now how I get that asterisk, which determines what I make my default policy, is by checking this box, requires routine approval. What this box does, 2 things. One is it enables me to set up patch staging, which we've talked about. I click this box, this field opens up, and I can set up stage deployment. But we didn't really talk about what else this does. This allows me to mark the patch manager and allows an easy way for me to acknowledge that, you know what, this is the one I have my default policy on. If I have any patches that I need to make a decision on, how can I be notified? And that's the other thing that this does. Because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this policy to be my default, and I'm going to check that requires routine approval, and then I'm going to assign my baseline. Right. So here, what I've done is for this policy, you know what? I talked to my partners, and in order for me to support you, I have to have a baseline of these patches that I have to have. After that, hey, you know what? We can pick and choose which ones we want to install, but you know what? Here's what I have to have on your devices. And you know what? For category, you know what? I just pick critical updates and definition updates. For severity, I want all important and all critical. And then over here, don't forget about my CVSS. Anything greater than 7, I want those automatically approved across my entire system. That's going to be my default policy. All right. Now I set those, and then I have my default policy, and the system cycles every 30 minutes. And hey, you know what? That's what's going to be my policy. And you can see down here that it's applied to my approvals default because that's the one that has all my agents in it. So that's cool. Now, how do I kind of monitor this?
Right.
Well, since this is my default policy, the rule that I always have is for my default policy, I don't want any patches on this policy that are not set. I want to make a decision on all of them.
Because you can even ignore them, right?
Yeah, because I want to kind of, okay, I automatically approve all these, but I still have 1,000 or 2,000 other patches that don't meet those characteristics. So I need to make a decision. Okay, by default, approve all these. And then I go through and you know what? I cut my numbers down to half. So I come in here and I load my default policy, and here I have all of these discovered patches. These are all the ones that are currently not set. So I want to make a decision. Even if I ignore all of them, I want this screen clear. All right? Because what's going to happen is as I'm keeping up with this, I'm only going to have to do this whenever Microsoft releases new patches.
Right.
So this should be pretty easy. Once I'm all caught up and I made all my determinations, right now I'm only making this decision once a month. After Microsoft Patch Tuesday. I have new patches, I have to make new decisions. I come in here and I make my decisions. So the thing that I love about requires routine approval is we're going to mark anytime you have new patches into that default approval policy. When I check that box for here, if I have any patches in my discovered section up here that I haven't made a decision on or are currently not set, that's where this red dot comes from. So if I open up my patch manager and I have been away and I see this red dot, I know right off the bat that I have patches in my default policy that are currently not set. I need to make a decision on them. It's like, oh, look, a bunch of Microsoft Silverlight patches just came up. Microsoft just released it. You know what? I don't need those. So I'm going to highlight all of these and I'm going to set them to ignore. And then once I do that, it takes them from the top, it puts them at the bottom, and it clears that dot. That requires routine approval. It's cool that it allows me to set up stage deployment, but don't forget the other advantage it has is it allows me to designate one group that I can keep track on that's going to be my baseline, And you know what? Hey, I want to know when I have patches that are new to my system that I haven't seen before. All the rest of these in set patches, you know what? Only things that are not set are going to be here. Whether I set it to ignore, approve, remove, deny, they're all going to be in set patches. So I want to make a decision on this policy of that patch. Now, I recommend they're either going to be approve or they're going to be ignore. Those are the two ones that I use here. I don't ever want to globally deny a patch because then I can never approve it anywhere else. Because think of those classifications. If I deny a patch globally, guess what? That's my trump card. I can't create another policy. It's like, you know what? For these agents, I want to go ahead and install it. Well, my default policy is applied to all my agents, so you know what? I just painted myself into a corner.
Right.
So if I set my default policy up and I either approve or install it or approve or ignore it, then that gives me leeway when I move down. You know what? For workstations, you know what? I ignored it here. For my workstations, I want to install it. For my servers, you know what? I'll go ahead and keep it ignored. Or vice versa. I have the flexibility if I set up my system like that. So this just gives me that added notification. Hey, I have patches that need to make approval. It was just Microsoft Patch Tuesday. I have new patches. Hey, let's go ahead and test them out.
What I really like about that too, like you said, it indicates you, and if you're using it correctly, it lets you know there are new patches. So like you said, every month you know you have to look at these patches. Well, I have to go out, and I know it's not hard, maybe Google, Bing, whatever, and I find out about these patches, but with the new patch manager, I get to the screen, I can also research straight from the screen. Once again, staying in that patch manager, all that information is clickable straight from these columns as well. So I'm looking at them and I'm able to make a decision on the information that I'm getting from patch manager.
I can click on the KBID, I can click on the bulletin, I can click on the information, get more information on it. And if I do have stage deployment, well, it's already set up to where I have new patches. Okay, it's going to start that cycle.
It's going to go through it.
So it's going to automatically do that, but everything's going to be right here in front of me. So it just gives me that added advantage. I know we talked about stage deployment, but I don't think we covered just how cool that requires root unit approval and what that does. It allows me to monitor my default policy a little more thoroughly, and just when I open up, oh, red dot, new patches. That's whenever I open mine up, as soon as I see that, oh, red dot, new patches, just boom, I have some decisions to make, I have some testing to do. Even if you don't use stage deployment, hey, it gives me the ability, oh, Microsoft just released, 10 more patches, I need to test those, and then I come back and make the decision. Oh, ignore those, install those, and we're ready to rock and roll.
Beautiful. Couldn't be any more simple.
So now the last thing I want to talk about is third-party patching. Now again, separate license, got to talk to your account manager. This does not come standard. We talked about setting up the third-party update policy. It's just setting the schedule is just like setting up a Microsoft update policy. Nothing is different. You just got to have a license. What I like to talk about is how do I kind of control the versions and what are some recommended practices. For me, what you're going to see me do is set up a third-party patching default where, you know what I do right off the bat? I sort by all the other manufacturers other than Microsoft, so I know what I have. Yep. And then what I do is I set a default where I ignore everything. Just off the bat, boom, I'm going to ignore all my third-party patching. I can apply this policy to my default group if I need to. If I'm not ignoring everything there, I can apply this to servers or workstations individually. But I just set up a policy where, you know what, until I say otherwise, just ignore everything. And that's what I do, is I create it and I ignore it. Then I come back and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to come up with my base installs. For third-party patching, base installs, what do I want across the board?
Right.
It's the exact same policy and the exact same methodology I'm doing with my other patches. Hey, you know what? What do I want as my baseline? Well, for me, I'm going to do Adobe Reader, DC, and 11, and you know what? Google Chrome, because I want to install Google Chrome on all my devices, because that's the one that we use. So here, I just set that up. I'm still sorting. I have all the ones here, and then I just approve the ones that I want. These are going to be ignored in my default group, so I don't have to worry about those. I'm just making classifications of the ones that I want to control. And of course, same rules apply. The install is going to trump the ignore, so I'm always going by that classification. But you can also see here where the action, I can set to update only. I can have control of the version. If there's a current version that I want to stick to, I have that ability. And for my third parties, these are action items where if I blow this up, you can see it doesn't matter what I'm doing. Now, you know what? I want to control my flash. Well, if I go to the approval setting, I can update only and I can update and install. So update only is like, hey, if you have it, go ahead and update it. Cool, so only the ones that have it are going to be controlled by this. If I want to install it, hey, if you don't have it, go ahead and install it and update it as needed. That gives me the ability to control it on devices that don't have it. And so now I'm controlling whether or not it's installed, whether or not I update it, and then I also have the version where, you know what, all the versions that I have, I can stay current, where it's always going to install the newer one, or you know what, I like this one, and you know what, before you upgrade it, I need to do some testing, so stay here until I tell you otherwise. So here's versioning control, where I'm assigning my policies, I'm building the third-party patching out. I have the ability to select whether or not I want to update, whether I want to install it. Hey, stay current, pick this version. I have the flexibility to control it from here. And that's really the big difference between third-party patching and my other patching. Still going by the classification, still going by the update policy for the day and time. The only difference for third-party is this version control, and I select whether or not I want to install it or update, and I can control the version. It's yes. Not as difficult as most people make it out to be.
All in one interface. Once again,
all
I mean,
right
they could have easily said, you know what, we're going to give them the ability to update Adobe and all that, but if they want installs, they're going to have to use scripts.
Yeah.
And plenty of software install scripts we use, but why not keep that functionality right there in the Patch Manager? Nice, easy to use interface. All I do is tell it, install it. I didn't build a script. I didn't do anything. I just said,
and this
if
is
it's
going to
not
be
there,
controlled
install it.
by like internally for
Right.
scripts, and you're just like, hey, we have this script. Oh, which one do I run? Okay, it's this one. Okay, boom, we're going to do it. So easy peasy, piece of cake. From that point, then for me, I'm just building out approvals where I need them. So you can see I build approvals for Adobe, Apple, Chrome, Mozilla, Oracle, all the ones that I have in my list. Now I'm going through and I'm creating my approvals. Well, I set my default to ignore everything, and I set my baseline to just install these. Well, now I have the ability, you know what? For all of my Adobe products, hey, I can approve them, I can update them, stay current, I can set my version exactly the way I want it, and then what do? I apply this policy to the group that needs it. Hey, I only want to put this on workstations, boom, I put this policy on workstations, and only workstations get this. If I need a certain section of workstations, I create a group, I apply a search that just populates those, and I apply it accordingly.
Maybe use an EDF if you needed to.
Same methodology applies. Create an EDF. Hey, here's my Adobe. Boom. Search, group, policy, everything's done. Everything is controlled the same way. It's just trying to attack it so it makes the most amount of sense. Same thing, not that big a deal. Now I'm going to my Apple. Same rules apply for 32 and 64-bit. I set the approval setting. I set the action version exactly what I want to do. I control everything from here. So isn't anything different than how I set up all my other ones. Hey, I'm going to break it down. For me, I create a default, I create my base, and then I associate the approvals based on that version or that software. That's the way I do it because it matches how I do everything else. Yep. So I create everything logically. I start clean with my group structure. I get my approvals and denies up at the top. I get my installs down at the bottom. Approvals only go by my classification. The installs and the updates and the reboot policies go by the priority in the group. I get everything organized and I come back through. Hey, I have my default that requires routine approval. I got my red dot. I know I got to make some decisions. All right, for my third party, I just create my groups out, create my policies, assign them. It's all the same thing, just attacked a little bit differently, and that's it.
It's beautiful. Basically, the biggest thing from this whole webinar is just to get to that foundation.
Yeah.
Get to something you can build up, and a lot of times this is going to take some thought ahead of time. What exactly am I going to need? Maybe sketch it out, see what it looks like on paper before you actually go in, especially if you're starting new. Why not start on the right foot? Get it baselined and just build up from there, whatever you need.
And talking to support, and we're talking to our product management team and talking to consulting, we all came up with this. Hey, we're all doing the same way. It's designed to do this. If I'm old school and I come in, this is the same way it's done in the past. If I'm new, what's a logical way to adopt it? Like Mr. Debot can attest to, it makes sense. I start clean, I start fresh, I build on it, I add exceptions, but I got to start somewhere. And this is what the kind of the premise of this webinar is, to kind of get everything cleaned up. All right, now it looks clean. I know where I'm at. Okay, now build on it from there. All right. Just search, group, policy. The foundation never changes. It's just the look and the feel. Where do I go to do this? That's the only thing that's changed in all of patching. All right, so we had a question about how the actual process from test pilot to production, how does that actually work? And we got a series of questions on these, just kind of trying to explain the back end and maybe a couple of the gotchas. And like an addendum to this one was, of course, how do you configure it? So I'm going to kind of just lump those two together and see if we can't just kind of go through that at the same time. So here in my test environment here, and we're talking about the deployment, test, pilot, production. So I have my 3 areas here. So the main thing that you want to kind of take out of this is when I set those, what happens? And that's kind of the premise of the question here is I've gone through and I know by default all of my devices are going to be in the production until I tell a specific number of them to go to test, to go to pilot. So I've gone through that. I've identified my handful of test devices. I've nominated my pilot devices, and I just want to kind of know a little bit better of what's going on. So when I set all this up, I configure it in my configurations, and I'm using my default approval policy because that's the only one this works on. So when I come in here and I log in here, default, when I assign my default policy, which is this requires routine approval, you can see if I uncheck that, I lose some functionality here. When I check that, that opens up my stage delay times, and this is where I actually turn this on. I don't go through the stage deployment unless I actively do this. So that's the first step in configuring all this and kind of figuring out what I want to do. Now that I know all my devices, I have everything set up. By default, when I turn this on, it's going to say 2 days. But you can see that I can skip an entire phase. If I don't want to use all 3 phases, I can only go, you know what, I want to go from pilot to production, so I can have no delay and I can start in pilot however you want to do it. And I can have 1 day all the way up to 3 weeks. Now, the reason that's very important is how this process works. So this is based on when I make that determination of the patch classification. So it's not waiting until, oh, I install the patch, and then after I install the patch, I'm going to wait 5 days after that. No. That is not how this works. When I set up my default policy and I approve a patch and it goes into my test stage, as soon as it gets in that test stage, that's when the clock starts. So if I do this, if I approve a patch and it's in this default policy, at 3 a.m. on, what is today? Wednesday, on Thursday, it's going to go through, it's going to make the calculation, it's going to say, hey, that patch has been approved to go into test. So at 3 a.m. it starts the clock. From 5 days from tomorrow, it's going to go, and the 5 days later at 3 a.m. it's going to say, hey, it's been 5 days, I'm automatically going to put it into the pilot. And that's how that process works in the back end. It's based on when that classification is actually made. It is not based on when that patch was installed or attempted to install. It's when you actually set that approval. So if you have auto approvals, I have a new patch coming out on Tuesday, it gets identified on Wednesday, hey, I automatically approve it, boom, that clock starts. So it's very important to know that back end process of how that works. Because the biggest thing is if I set that to 5 days, okay, 5 days it goes to pilot, well, you know what, I'm going to go 10 days, I'm going to give it a little bit more. 10 days after that, it's going to go to all my production computers. The main thing that you have to realize here is I have to make sure I'm patching during these days. So if I set my test duration to 5 days, well, if I set my patch or Microsoft update policy to patch once a month, well, odds are I might miss those 5 days. So we have to make sure our update policy is kind of coincides with when I'm in that deployment stage. So if I'm in 5 days, you know what, that's probably a good idea that for my test, I'm patching every day so I have that full 5 days to try and install patches and see if I'm having any problems. Same thing when it goes into pilot. I got 10 days. I want to make sure all of the agents that are in my pilot program, I want to make sure that they're patching during these 10 days. That way I have 2 full cycles of patches to test before it gets released into the wild or general population. That's usually the 2 terms that I use. I want to make sure that I'm actually testing these. Now, this only applies to patches that have been approved. All right? If I come in here and I'm going through the test and I'm looking at these devices and I have a problem patch, I'm like, oh, this is a problem patch. I certainly don't want it to go through pilot and go through production. As soon as I ignore it or I deny that patch, it automatically takes that patch classification and applies it to my pilot and production devices. So that's a little bit of the back end of how you configure this and what goes on in the back end. There's an internal process that runs. As soon as it reads that the approval is changed, that's when the clock starts. If I find a problem within my test stage of a specific patch, you know what? I want to ignore it, and then boom, it automatically ignores it in the pilot and production stages. It's not going to carry it over into the next stage. That's the whole point. As I'm setting this up to test it, okay, I have 15 patches, 14 of them are great. Okay, nope, that one, you know what? I'm going to ignore it, and I'm not going to push it out to pilot or production. There could be a scenario where my test stage, everything was fine. It got to pilot, you know what? Hey, there I had a problem with a couple patches. I ignore it there so it doesn't get released into general population into my production. So that's a little bit more of in-depth kind of conversation about stage deployment. I know our documentation doesn't explain the back end. It's just like, hey, you set it, and in 2 days it copies that approval policy into the next round, and that's pretty much what it does. But that's kind of a little sneak peek in the back end and what's actually going on. We just got to make sure that whatever we set these stages to, we got to make sure that we're patching during that. Production, you know what, that's when I can set it to a month or, you know, twice a month or whatever I want. But when I'm in my test stage and I'm, you know, I only want to be here a week or 2 weeks, I got to make sure I'm patching, and I want to try and give me enough opportunity so all my devices can patch so I can get an accurate representation of what's going on with these patches. I'm trying to test these. I don't want to have any problems, so I got to make sure I'm patching during my test and pilot stage.
Sounds about right. Basically, we're just talking about a delay here. On the front end, that's all you're looking at is a delay, and that delay is based on when did that patch get brought in and approved. That's all it is. When did it enter that test stage? That's when it starts, like he's saying. Now, this can actually be used differently. If you're not actually testing, we'd come across somebody who was looking to put delays. They patch by, say, 4 weeks out from when the patch was released. You can actually even utilize this feature for something like that. You just don't put any machines into that test production, and we go ahead and set a test delay of 3 weeks on it, and then maybe 1 week for the pilot, put a few machines in there to test it, and then 4 weeks later, it's into that production, you know. So there's other ways of using it. It's really just a delay. That's what this staging is, and it's automated to move that patch through these groups.
Because we've had conversations with partners, they're like, well, when a new patch comes out, we don't do anything with it for 3 weeks. And I'm like, well, you might as well just throw it in a test stage. Have a couple machines just install it to see what's going on. I'm like, you're kind of wasting 3 weeks. Yeah, even if I have a couple, if I have, you know, a VM, you know, desktop and a VM server, something that I have in-house, so that 3 weeks, if I'm just sitting there, I'm not doing anything, well, that's a perfect way to use the test stage or even the pilot or just kind of get an idea of what you're doing. When I first talked to a partner that told me they were doing that, I'm like, well, you're kind of wasting those 3 weeks. I'm like, why not just turn this on and just throw a bunch of devices and test? Give you your 3 week window there and just get a head jump or a jump start on what's going on. He's like, wow, I never even thought of that. That's a good way to kind of attack that. I don't need to use all of them, but if I just want to kind of wait and see what's going on with the patches, maybe Microsoft, you know, re-releases something, or I have more documentation on it, well, we can kind of get ahead of the curve, and maybe we can find an issue for it before, you know, it had a problem here, maybe I can troubleshoot it and I can find a resolution to it before anybody else, and I can post it, I can be the hero.
Absolutely.
It's all about being the hero. You know
Absolutely.
But that's just a little more deep dive into stage deployment. So got that question, and we kind of have some one-on-one conversation with that, but I don't think we really had a chance to dive
really
deep
dive
into
into
kind of the back-end process. So thank you for that question. You ready for the next question?
Absolutely.
All
That's
right, cool.
it. Oh, we've been getting this question quite a bit.
Why some machines did not patch on said day? Is there something I missed in the configuration? So this is probably this is one of our most common ones. Is like, hey, it was supposed to patch on this day and it didn't patch on this day. What is my first step in trying to troubleshoot? Well, if I know a specific device that didn't patch, or you know what, I had an entire location that didn't patch, the question I always ask in support, I'm like, well, let's narrow it down. Was it an entire client? Was it an entire location? Or was it a handful of devices? And usually it's like, well, I checked a couple machines. I'm like, well, let's narrow it down. Is the entire location offline? Is the entire client offline? Do I have firewalls? Let's assume that all the communication is there and I can kind of everything is communicating properly, and I can send a command to all the devices there. How do I isolate just one device? Hey, this guy right here did not patch. What's my first step? Well, the one thing I love about the new patch manager is, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to see exactly what's going on with that one device. So I go into my devices view, and let's say this is my device. Well, I'm going straight to groups because I want to see what's currently being assigned to that device. Because I can go into my configuration, I can see the groups, and I can see all my groups, and I can look at the priorities, and I can click on each group, and I can try and find which device it's in to see if it's in that hierarchy. But I can get a better view for an individual machine by going to that device, going to the groups, and I can see all of the information on that device. And what I'm really looking for here is this effective policy. This is kind of the end-all be-all of what this device is doing. Because it doesn't matter what all the groups I'm in, it only matters what's getting applied to that device. And here, if I scroll across using my effective policy, I know that this device is supposed to be patching Sunday from 3 to 5. It has no third-party update policy, it's suppressing a reboot, and as currently has 5 approval policies. Now I can kind of take a look up here and I can see, well, it's got a local override, so it's not patching with the rest of my servers. It's got a local override, and that's why it should be patching at Sunday. So if that's not what's happening, and then I can kind of dig a little bit deeper. But this is a server, you know, it should be on pretty much 24/7, so why isn't it patching, you know, Sunday from 3 to 5? But to just make sure that everything's getting applied correctly, I just want to kind of start here and say, okay, do I have all my ducks in a row? Do I have everything applying? Because you know what, it's patching on Sunday, and you know what, I thought it was supposed to be patching on Wednesday, and you know, I checked it on Thursday and I don't have anything patching. Well, lo and behold, I have a local override because I was looking at the server group and I was looking at it's in there and I see the policy, but in that group configuration, I can't see the local override. But if I go into the device itself, I can see if it has a local override. Maybe it's as simple as that. Now, that's one scenario when I'm working with the server. Now, servers should be online, and you shouldn't really have too much of a problem with that kind of part of it. Now, if I'm looking at a device or a desktop, well, I can come in here and say, well, I don't have a local override. It's supposed to be patching, you know, every day or from 1 to 7, or I'm looking at that update policy. I'm like, well, what is that update policy supposed to be doing? I can kind of backtrack and make sure it's set up the way that I think it is. So I'm using my extended policy. So here's my extended patch install. So here's from 1 to 6. So I have a big window, and you know what? So everything is using everything that I'm supposed to. It's trying to wake it up. It's in manage mode. It's in all of my settings. So basically, I want to start from the device and work my way, you know, back. Is it what policy is it getting assigned? What when I see that the what's getting applied, I can check that policy to make sure it's meeting that parameter. I can see what group it's on, but I can kind of go through that instance. If all of this and it's still not, you know, you still can't figure it out, that's when I go into the Windows update log. And just kind of troubleshoot to make sure, okay, I know I have a wake on LAN, but you know what? That only works if it's set in the BIOS. And you know what? I have a manage or a master device there that's sending that command. If it's shut down, you know what? There's not much I can do. So I can look in the Windows Update log and do I have any communication between 1 and 7? Well, if it shows in the log or any log that I have that it's shut down at 5 o'clock and doesn't get restarted until the next day, well, you know what? It's missing its window, and now I've kind of figured out what's going on. All the policies are getting assigned like I expected to. The effective policy is right. The policy is right, but still not doing. Okay, then I go into the device and I try to troubleshoot the device. Hey, the first thing I want to know is, do I have communication? Do I have power on during this window? You know what? I go into the device. Do I see that it's online now? Can I do an inventory, kind of see what's going on? And make sure that everything is working correctly. Then I go into the device and I just kind of check the log, see if I can get more information. Maybe if this is a device that's always turned off, maybe this is the point where, you know what, I want to enable daytime patching because I'm trying to patch and every time this user keeps turning their machine off and we can't get it woken up in time. So that's just a couple of ways that we can kind of use that. So why machines didn't patch, you know, it's not going to be this one thing. It's kind of a series of steps. If I know I have communication to the device, I go to the device, I check and see what's being applied using that effective policy on the device group screen. Then I check the policy, make sure it's doing exactly what I want. And then if everything looks good, all right, then I go. For me, I look and make sure that the service is running and it's on during that time. I can check the update logs. I can check the other logs on the device to see. Usually I can see if it's been shut down, I can find that in the logs somewhere. And that's usually, back in support, that was usually the big thing, is it's like we can verify that everything is getting applied correctly. Okay, let's see if the device was on. And that's really where we start.
Absolutely. Before we move on to the next one, Tall Guy, we're going to step back to the staging for a second. We had a question come in that involved that, so I don't want to get too far away from that and removed. But the question was, if Microsoft releases a 0-day exploit patch to patch up a major security flaw, is there a way to advance patches beyond this test stage and throw them right into production, which is very easy. So I wanted to make sure we got this demo out just to show you how easy it is to actually push patches from one stage to another. So you don't have to necessarily wait for these patches to go through those progressions. If you know there are patches in there that you absolutely have to get out in production, whether they're security or they're high impacting to maybe fix something else in another patch it broke, then you're going to want to go ahead and advance these through the stages and get them out right away. So we did take that in consideration when we built the staging out on this.
So one thing I always like to do is if I know of the 0-day patch, then I'm going to find it in my list. If I need to get it out right now, I can. So if I find a patch, I'm going to look for it, maybe. So if I have a patch, I can look for it. If I need to put it out right now, which is one thing we talked about, is I can find the patch, I can see all the devices, and I can install it there. And my thinking is going a little slow. Now, let's say I want to kind of expedite that process. And this is going slower than I always like. And it always wants to, I'm getting, help me out here, Debak. I'm drawing a blank. Where do we?
Oh, approvals.
Approvals.
Yes.
So I'm going.
Should be a column and a grid. It's either in a patches grid or approvals grid. We have a column.
Yeah.
For patch stage. There it is. Or is that it down on the pad? Maybe you were on it. Is that it in the last column there? What's
right
that?
There.
Or is that patch status? No, that's patch stage. So maybe that is patch stage.
It's
hard to screen with this resolution. This resolution kills us whenever we have to present it because the patch manager is enormous, the interface. And it doesn't scale so well when we get this down to 1024 by 768.
So here you can see it's in production. Let me see if I can find one.
You got to find one that's in test or in pilot, and you'll notice that then this text is underlined there that he's kind of showing you in that last column there. And you'll be able to click on that, and then that brings up a dialog box with just 3 check boxes, and so you can select which stage you want to throw it into. Now, once you've thrown a patch into production, though, there is no bringing that patch back. So you have to be careful and actually be only moving forward the patch you actually want to move forward, because once we're in production, that's it. There's no going back.
It's in the approval policy. It's right here, the stage. If it was in test or pilot, then I'd be able to click on it, and I can go from test to pilot or pilot to production.
Let me see if I can find it.
I can do that. It is right here. I'm just trying to find an example of one that I would have in a view for everybody to see, and it only works in my default, obviously.
Let me see if I can find it in the documentation really quick.
It is going to be in your default policy because obviously that's why I have staging. It's going to be marked by that asterisk. It is here. I just currently don't have any that are not in the other stages that I can kind of go with. But it is here. It is possible. I find it 0-day. For me, if I need to get it out right now, I go in there and I manually install it, or I go to my default policy. I come in here, test pilot, and I can still look for that device. If I'm still looking for that title, I can still use the filter editor. I can find it in here, but it is going to be in the approval policy where stage deployment is kind of ironed out. I should be able to find it there. So sorry, I don't have a perfect example in here. But it is here. It's in the default policy. And that's one thing. It's like somebody asks you a question. I'm like, it's somewhere. I know it's in here. Just takes me a second to find it.
It's in one of these grids.
That's why we have 2 people here. Because, not one person.
So, it is very easy, though. Like I said, it's just in that column. You're just going to click in it just like all of the other features we have in there. If it's an actionable item, it's going to be underlined. So you'll click on that and then just change the stage right from there, and that's going to immediately push that stage out.
So cool. Anything else on stage deployment?
We are good with the stage deployment for now. So let's go ahead and proceed with what we have queued up already.
Okay, so this question, it kind of ties a little bit to the other question, is configuration and, how do I troubleshoot? So now for laptops, notebooks, was the best time to install patches? Well, I don't have a definitive answer for that because everybody's going to be different. For laptops, we know that they're not going to be online as much as anybody else or any other devices, especially servers and then, desktops, and then we have laptops as far as their stability and getting patches installed. For me, with the new patch manager, the cool thing about that is I can set that daytime patching. What I typically recommend partners to do is to create my own group and put your laptops in there and get your own policy. If you kind of want to have that outside of kind of the normal schedule, is maybe I just want to extend the window just for laptops to see if I can hit it at the end of the day, or use the daytime patching. If I want to create a group, real quick, create a new group, and I put all of my laptops in there, I can create a search that's looking just for laptops. If I need to kind of diversify that a little bit based on client, I have the ability and the structure here within Automate to kind of create how finite I want it to be. But it's real easy to kind of do all that within here, create a group, get my laptops in there, and then kind of play around with the update policy. Maybe for my servers, that's going to be pretty stable. I can, pretty much do that from 3 to 5 and not have a problem. For desktops, 1 to 7 is typically what I do. Maybe for my laptops, I start at, and it's also who's using my laptops. If they're salespeople and they're working from typically 9 to 5, or this person always works from 10 to 8, it's always going to vary. That's why there's not a definitive answer. But I want to just kind of maybe cast a wider net. Instead of 3 to 5, 1 to 7, maybe I'm going from 11 to 6 to see if I can get these people to leave their computers on so I can get them patched. If not, I'm definitely going to be using the enable daytime patching. And that way, I have my laptop, say if they miss that window that I've expanded specifically for them, well, let's go ahead and let's make sure as soon as they come back online that I can go ahead and I can start patching them during the day. And I can also use, hey, do not patch if uptime is less than 30 minutes. So that doesn't mean that as soon as it comes on, I'm going to wait 30 minutes before I try to install patches. So using this, expanding my window, getting the laptops in their own group, getting their own update policy, and using daytime patching, that's just some of the ways I can look to kind of get my laptops and notebooks patched. But it's all going to be kind of what you want to do, and that's why there isn't any catch-all answer for this. It's just your people, their schedules, what's going to be the most effective. Most people is like, what, I just put them in my regular window and I enable daytime patching and it just does it with everything else. You know what, I've seen people, isolate all my laptops and try to get all my laptops on the same schedule, and sometimes, well, my salespeople have to be on this schedule, and my other people have to be on this schedule. So you can be as broad or as kind of finite as you need it to be to kind of get it to do it. But it's flexible enough, and as soon as you kind of get accustomed to creating these, it's real simple to kind of configure and customize the way you need it.
Okay. Actually, if we could, we want to kind of rewind back to the one before this. You had a question about them finding patch windows and all this. Okay. A question, well, it wasn't a question, it was kind of coming off of this. He's saying the only time the patch window shows up on the computer screen is when the Microsoft policy, the approval policies are all filled out on the group. If I use the default policy set up as you displayed, the patch window doesn't display at all. Am I missing something? So, not sure exactly what you displayed at that time. I was kind of answering some questions.
So he's saying that if he puts the policy on the default?
If I use the default policy setup as you have displayed, then the patch window doesn't display at all.
And the patch window doesn't display on the device itself.
Yeah.
If you see something set up where, hey, it's here, but that's not what's showing, make sure that device is in that group. So if I open up that group and I don't see the device that I'm looking for in this list, then obviously not. If you're having an issue where, you know what, I see the policies, and there's another troubleshooting step is if I have the groups, kind of defined and everything, and it looks like it's fine, I go in there and the agent isn't in that group, well, then I have to take a step back and kind of go to one thing that I always try to reinforce is when you're having an issue, always go back to what's, the foundation of Automate is search group policy. So, well, first of all, I have to populate a search, and then that search has to be tied to a group, and then on that group, I have to assign a policy. So if I'm not seeing on the device that it's in that group, well, then I go to the group and I see if it's in here. If it's not in here, well, then I got to take a look at the search, and I have to check out the characteristics of that search. What is that search looking for in order to populate, and what characteristic or criteria is this device not meeting to be populated in that group? So the end-all be-all is when we're doing this, outside of the patch manager, there isn't anything complicated. It's what we've always done with ConnectWise Automate is we're populating a search, we're assigning it to a group, and then we're applying something on the group. So if you're not getting in that group and you're not seeing that group showing up on the device, that means it's not populating that group. So if you're setting your policies, but you don't see that policies because that group's not there, then you got to go back to the search and take a look at that search. My patch install workstation, hey, if that's the search that's not getting populated, well, then I want to find that search, patch install workstations, and I want to kind of take a look at this and be like, okay, which characteristic is this search, is this device not meeting? And then I kind of try to figure out, hey, why isn't this getting populated? Why isn't this, doing that? Now, if you get to that point and you're still having issues, or why isn't it populating, and you can't figure it out why, then at that point, that's when you probably want to get an extra set of eyes on it, maybe open a ticket with support to kind of figure out what's going on.
I think that's where we're going to head to, because she's following along here and she's pretty much checking off everything you've checklisted here. So if those troubleshooting steps really, and you're still having some issues seeing these windows, then I think it's time for that support call, because according to her, it's in both groups. She's checked both groups. She's checked both policies in there. She checked the searches, and it's showing up everywhere it should be. Okay. So at this point, it's...
Yeah, then that's when I go into the logs and I see what the communication is with that device during the Windows update
it might be a
time.
communication issue.
Yeah, so if let's say you're patching 3 to 5, then I can look at the Windows update log to see if I have any communication between that time, and I go into the event logs to see. Pretty much, I'm looking for a shutdown command and seeing if that machine is getting shut down during that time. But you'll typically see in the Windows update log that I'll have communication, then it'll stop, and then sometime the next day that I'll pick up communication. And that's a pretty clear sign that we're having issues or that machine was shut off. Also in the Windows update log, I'm looking for error codes. It says, hey, we tried to do something, but we couldn't issue the command because, you know what, the service wasn't running, or I had a Windows update error, but that Windows update log will kind of help pinpoint. And that's kind of the troubleshooting steps, making sure everything is configured correctly. Am I following, the bouncing ball and how this should? I'm like, okay, everything seems correct. It's in the right groups. It's got the right policies. Okay, let's dig a little deeper. Let's get into the logs, and that is the next step. And
it's even patching. It's just not showing that information being displayed. So that is.
So that's if it's getting to the head scratching time, then I would definitely open up a ticket with support and let them look at it. Let them kind of go through the logs and see if they can figure anything out. But I would put in the ticket, hey, here's what I checked, and I even asked Robert and Chris, and they said, hey, I've gotten to this point, so I'm kind of at a loss. So yeah, we can lead you so far, and then without looking at what's going on, because I'd be the first one to I'd go into the logs on the device and I'd figure out what's going on at that point and see if I can find an error, see if I can find if it was online during that time. So that's my next troubleshooting step, is what I would do.
Here's an interesting one. I really haven't had this one come up before, but basically it goes against kind of what we've been telling people how to use our structure in a group, but they want to know, why can't they apply the require routine approval for more than one group? Like routine approvals for maybe workstation and then some for servers, which is kind of going against the grain on kind of how we have them shaping the groups, where you have this one default where you pretty much just put a classification on everything you can, whether it be ignore, install, or approve, but you want to stay away from deny. And then you start working your workstations and your servers in independent groups that you're now using the exceptions for. You're going to install the ones you maybe ignored in the default policy or deny them outright for the servers that you weren't updating. So, but as to why we don't have it in the product, I really can't answer to that.
Well, because the way this was designed to isolate one policy that allows me to check periodically, and one of the things that we kind of built that for is this bad boy right here, is this red dot, is one thing we want to kind of, without having to go and manually go through this, is I want an indicator that, you know what, I have new patches. And so my default policy that I'm using, I want to know when there's new patches. So one of the things that classification does is it gives me that red dot, and that red dot indicates that, hey, on my default policy, I have patches that don't have a classification on it. I need to make a decision. So something happened, whether it's Microsoft Patch Tuesday or, you know what, there was a 0-day release, that gives me an indicator where on my default policy, which is we kind of define as my baseline, this is kind of my baseline group where, you know what, outside of my automated approvals and ignores everything out, I need to make a decision on. So it gives me that one group that I can kind of keep an eye on. Now, for servers and workstations, you can assign that to individual ones, but it's going to be one that I want to keep an eye on, which is why I always define it as my baseline, which is why I always set that level of patches. You know what, across the board, I want all my patches to be at this level. Whether, you know, it's a install or ignore, I want to make that decision. So kind of coupling that with an indicator, there's not a real good way. Well, for, you know, for one group I use this color, for the other group I use a different color, and then we have colorblind people, and, you know, then it's all shot to heck. But the purpose of it is kind of twofold. Is one, I get one group where I can use stage deployment. It's one group I can keep an eye on any patches that come out that I need to keep an eye on because I mark that group for that. Now, it doesn't need to be that specific group. You can set it up to be for your workstations, and you kind of do servers all manually. Okay, then I just want to keep an eye on my workstations or my servers. But kind of the methodology or the madness behind that is to identify that one group. And it kind of goes back, if you're new, then this might be kind of doesn't make any sense to you. But the way it used to be is, for my old school people, is we had that Windows Updates.approve group, and that served as my kind of default policy. And that's kind of what we recreated, and kind of why we did it that way is it gives me the one group where I have all my devices in by default, and it allows me to set that baseline. It allows me to start with that, you know, defining group, and one that I can kind of determine and kind of know and, you know, kind of signal when I have new devices, and allows me to set up stage deployment. It doesn't have to be set up that way. That's the way our device is. That's the way that, you know, talking to our partners, you know, 90% of them kind of go along with that, but that's not for everybody. No. You know, this is customizable. Everybody always wants that recommended practice, you know, what's the easiest way to do it, and this is kind of what we came up with. It's, you know, I have a default, then I isolate my workstations and my servers, and that's what's kind of built out of the box, and I create everything off of that, and that's really kind of the reasoning for that.
Well, to piggyback off of that too, there was also a question about that red dot, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Someone was wondering, they'd set up, they didn't have staging or anything set up on it, and they were wondering why that red dot doesn't disappear. The red dot doesn't disappear unless you've actually set all the patches on that default. So whatever policy you've actually set that routine approval checkbox on, you need to make sure you come in when you have that red dot. That means there's new patches that need to be set on that particular policy. Whether, once again, whether that's just ignore them all. You can just simply ignore them, but you have to put some eyes on that patch so that you can actually set a classification on it and then go from there. The purpose of that is to make sure that eyes are seeing these patches. You don't have patches just coming into the system that, you know, nobody's taking a look at, they're not aware of, they don't know what they're for. So this kind of forces you to say, oh, I have new patches, they just came in the system. Let's go ahead and see what these are about. You can read them, you can get the descriptions from here, you can follow the links if you want to. Sorry. And then just go from there. So that's what that red dot is for. It has nothing to do with the staging. It's just hooked up to that default policy, because the default policy, once again, is the only one we can also enact staging on. Yep. So that's why we tied it to that.
And going back when I set that default policy, when I unchecked that box, then that opened up my staging. Well, I don't have to enable staging. I can just use it for that red dot to show up. And what that signifies is if I have that red dot and I go into my approval policies and I see my default policy, which is designated by the asterisk, it means in discovered patches, I have patches here that just showed up. These are outside any of the auto approvals or ignores or anything I have on my default policy. So you know what? I made a global determination of, you know what, automatically approve all my critical updates, automatically ignore drivers and language packs. Outside of that, hey, what's showing up in my system? Then I want to make, a conscious decision what I want to do with these. If this is something where, you know what, I am completely fine with ignoring all of these, then I can come in here. As soon as I do that, boom, the red dot is gone. All the patches are set on this policy, and hey, everything is good. Because you should, in a perfect world, you should only see that red dot after Microsoft Patch Tuesday, or I have a new device that checks in with a patch that I've never seen before, I've never made a classification on, or that 0-day patch. But that just gives me an indicator of when I open it up for the first time, hey, my default policy, hey, I have patches that I need to kind of address. And you can see how easy it is. The removal tool, I can ignore those, boom. Maybe if I get in the habit of, you know what, I'm always doing that, I can set a policy of always ignoring that, and then I can take that out. Because that's another thing I can use this for, is like, well, outside of that, I don't know what else I need to automate. Maybe I want to kind of start small in my baseline, and I'm only auto-approving a very small number of patches. Well, as I come through here and I'm like, oh, well, it seems like I'm always approving these, so I can go ahead and set another policy and automatically approve them. Or flip side, oh, I never need to install those. I can set up another policy and assign to this default. So it gives me that, easy ability to kind of manage this, because a lot of people get really overwhelmed when they look and like, oh, my goodness, I have 5,000 patches and I don't know what to do with them. So, well, let's start small. In my default policy, let's auto approve all my critical severity patches. I always tell people, start at the most critical and work your way down. So if I always need to install that, or at least I'm going through my staging, hey, that's fine. Let's go ahead and start with critical. And I come in here, I find myself constantly approving another category of patches. Boom, that's another reason for me to create another policy to kind of take that off my to-do list. And as I'm going through here, I'm going to start defining more policies as it goes through there. And that's what's cool about this, is I can create one policy. I'm like, okay, then as I'm going through it, well, I can easily create another policy, assign it to this default, create another policy, assign this. I want to approve that, I want to ignore that. So I can kind of take care of most of this. Now, that's not just something, unless you've done patching for a very long time, that you're accustomed to doing. It's going to take time to kind of weed through that, but that's where you get started. I take 5,000, I go with my critical, I can knock it down to 4,000. I start with my next category. Okay, as I'm going through this, I see a pattern, I see what I'm doing, and I create policies to do that. Outside of my default, maybe, you know what, I'm still auto-ignoring these because I don't want to do it. And that's when I'm going to my servers, my workstations. I'm like, well, for my workstations, I want to keep this ignored. For my servers, I want to install it, vice versa. But that just gives me a default kind of way to go by. It's like, hey, how can I simplify my job by looking and see if I can catch the pattern of any of the patches that I can try and automate as much as possible.
All right. Well, let me bang out these two really quick. These have been very popular as well since we've gotten a Patch Manager. Now, I know a lot of people out there, we've been struggling with Windows 10 coming out, right? Microsoft is kind of changing up their patching concepts. They're talking about bringing in deadlines to where they're going to force patches on machines. So these two questions come in about some of the newer features in Windows 10 and some of the current tracks they're going. One is, can I choose between Windows 10 current branch or the current business branch in the Patch Manager? And at this time, no, that is not an available feature within the Patch Manager. And the same thing for the next question, which is, how do I configure Windows 10 to follow the current business branch patch as opposed to the current branch? We do know that it's currently in research and development for the Patch Manager. These are things they are working on. The first step was after release just to get the Patch Manager, a little bit more useful, a little bit, enhance the performance, get rid of some of the lag that we had generally. And we've gotten it to a point now where the Patch Manager's, it's humming along fairly well. The screens are moving better and it's just reacting. So we've gotten a lot of those bugs out, or I should say the feedback that we've gotten, we've addressed on the Patch Manager. So the next stage in this now is kind of tackle these Windows 10 issues, some of these exclusive features they've been bringing out and kind of the way they've been handling the patches to kind of dig in and start helping you guys deal with Windows 10 on a more global scale. But right now, they're just simply the features aren't built in for anything Windows 10 specific.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're not on an email list with Microsoft when they do make changes.
Yes.
We don't get notified ahead of time. So it's like, oh, what's it doing now? I'm like, okay, well, let's get that into R&D as quickly as possible.
Yes. Here's a quick one. This is really easy to demo out too. How do you install a patch manually, i.e. IE11 has having issues, so you want to install it. Is there a way to push it out manually? Of course there is. I mean, this is Automate. We like to automate everything, but sometimes when you're working on something, you just need to manually take care of it right then and there. So it's a pretty painless process whenever there's any patch that you actually need to just go ahead and update manually. The first thing you can do, as you can see, is go into the patches view here. So we need to find the patch, first of all, that we want to deal with, right?
So if I'm looking for a specific one, I can use keyword. I can say Internet Explorer 11 if I want to see all the versions of Internet Explorer. That's what I did, and I'm like, oh, here's that. I have all of these. I'm looking for a specific one. If I'm looking for a specific KB ID, I can be a little more general. But if I'm looking for the install, all I have to do is find the patch that I'm looking for. Right. Because you know what? Hey, you know what? They're all cumulative updates. But you know what? This is for Internet Explorer 11 specifically. So if I'm looking to install it, I find it. When I click on it, it's going to give me all the devices down here that it's showing up that it needs. And then here I can go, it's not attempted because I've denied it. So here I can just isolate it and I can install patch on device. Now, when I send this command, it completely bypasses any of the auto policy approved. Now I say auto because that approval policy is only dictated when I'm going through the process. Hey, when it's automated, hey, it's going through my policy and everything. When I submit a command from here, it's sending that command right now. I don't care what the policy is. I'm going to do it right now because the manual command is going to trump the auto command. So I want to make sure that that's crystal clear. That's why I can use this. Hey, you know what? I deny this globally, but you know what? I have that one device. You know what? I know it's denied, but I need to install it. So I can find it here. I can highlight it, and I can install that patch on that device. So it's easy. Go in the patches. You can do the keyword search, find the patch you're looking for. You can go by KBID. You can go by keyword, whatever you're looking for. I went general in Internet Explorer, and then I found the one that I was looking for. Hey, 284.1134. That's the one. Boom, I highlight it, my computer down here, and all I have to do is click Install Patch on Device. In reverse, if you find one that is installed, hey, we can attempt to uninstall it if, hey, maybe it didn't go out there. But if it's anything I want to do manually, my process is find the patch, see how many devices, and do it from there. So if it's an individual machine, maybe I go to the device itself, and then I go there and I can find the patch and I can do it there. But if it's a patch and I want to see how many devices, maybe it's more than one, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30, I can, you know what, auto select all of these or kind of mass select all of these and I can install them all at once. Or if I have 10 and I only want to install it on 5, I can use my control, boom, 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 get the 5 and install it. So real easy to kind of do from here.
And last one I have queued up before we hit back into our Q&A panel here is when installing patches, where are these patches being pulled from? Do they pull from the LabTech server for each patch, pull from Microsoft, they pull from the probe? Well, this depends. I mean, straight default, the way it is right now, what we're doing is we're going to pull that straight from Microsoft. Each agent knows what patches it needs. It's going to go out and it's going to grant these patches. Now, if you have caching set up, then it's going to follow whatever caching rules you've done. So I can't remember. Did we actually go in this webinar and go through the caching? No, that was just through our workshop.
Yeah, I think the workshop. But basically, if you have nothing else going on, what the process does is when the agents kind of communicate with Windows updates and they send the information to us, we put it in the database. And in the information in the database, and you look at the table in the database, there is the download link. And it says, hey, go here to get this patch. So when you queue it up and you say, hey, install this patch, we find that link and we're like, okay, we go to get that. So we're going to the Windows Update site that Microsoft gave us and we're going to go download and install that patch from there. So when you say, hey, install all these 5, well, we take all 5 of those and we're like, hey, we're going to package these up and go and download all these patches from Windows Update and we're going to install them. That is, you know, the default setting. That's how it's going to be. If you use caching, so let's say I'm at a location and I have set up a repository locally, then what we're going to do is, okay, I'm looking and I have caching set up. So I'm going to go to the server that I've designated or the share drive that I designated. I'm going to look for there first. Hey, is it there? Sweet. Then I'm just going to download it locally because our location, all our devices can talk to each other. So I'm just going to go to that server or the device that has a lot of storage on it that I've set up and I'm going to go get it there.
If it's not there and I have caching set up, well, okay, we're going to put a marker there and say, okay, nobody else try to get this. I'm going to go get it from the Windows Update site, and I'm going to put it here in this repository. That's how your repository builds when you're using caching. So we put a marker there. Hey, we're going to go get it. We copy it over there. Boom. So the next person in line is going to get it locally. And you're going to build that repository so nobody's going to Windows Update. WSUS server is pretty much the same thing. The WSUS server is just, instead of Windows Update, it's bypassing that address and saying, hey, you're not going to Windows Update. We've already talked to Windows Update, and the WSUS server is going to be used as that kind of caching server. When you're using a WSUS with LabTech, we're going to create that as our repository, and that WSUS server is going to be the IP address that we're going to go to first. So the one caveat there is, in order to get it from the WSUS server to the Automate server, is they have to be approved here to be able to make it into our server and then be approved again. So that is dual approval process that has to go on there, but that is the communication and how that flow goes. The bottom line is somebody needs to be talking to the Windows Update server. Whether it's the device, whether it's the repository or the caching server that you're using, or the WSUS, we got to have that communication. When one of those links fails, that's where we usually have issues, and that's usually where we start troubleshooting. A lot of times, when I was in support for almost 2 years, a lot of people didn't know, hey, you know what, I just put an SPS box in there, and that role of WSUS is enabled by default, and so all the devices are looking there, and we don't have anything. So that seems to be an issue. Or you had an old WSUS, and it's not, it's been decommissioned, but the IP addresses are still locked into the device, and they think that's where they need to go. So that's where all this communication kind of goes into hand. But the bottom line is we got to have that device to be able to talk to Windows Update to get that information. When they put their inventory into our server, it gives us that link. When you install it, we go to that link, whether it's getting that download file from a repository or a server. That is the communication that has to happen.
Absolutely. I think we've only got one more to clear out here
right.
so far. This is kind of going along some issues that we've actually already been discussing earlier, but I find it redundant to have multiple Microsoft Update policies and groups for each combination of servers, patch window, it's Monday, server patch window Tuesday, and then a workstation patch window Monday. Basically, could you just create the groups by patch day, i.e. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, another group searching for servers versus workstations, another group for default policy? This would mean a server could fall into 3 groups, and it may be in those 3 groups, but when it comes to those update windows, it's only going to follow the one, which is the lowest group that it's in that list by priority. So it's only going to listen to that window.
So yeah, and we kind of set this up as kind of an easier way to kind of comprehend of how these policies work. It's not the de facto way that you're supposed to do it. This is the way it worked in the past. That we kind of took that methodology, we streamlined it a little bit, and we just kind of gave you an easy way to kind of see what's going on. Because I can set it up, I can go, I'll use the example server role, but you know what, I don't really want to do it by server role. I just want to go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I want to put them in there. That's fine. Just know that the way you put them in the group is how that policy is going to get assigned. That the one on the bottom is going to trump anything above it. This is just our way of kind of giving you a recommended practice to go by. The one thing I do still and will always recommend is isolating the approval policies from my update and reboot policies. Because when you start doing everything on one, it just gets confusing, because a lot of people, the big problem they have is they do the approval policy, and when they put the update and reboot policy, they think it's all going by this list. And it's not. The approval policy only goes by that patch classification, and that's one of the biggest hangups on this is the install, the update, and the reboot windows. That's the only thing that follows in the order in which they're shown here. So if you don't want to do workstations, you don't want to do server roles, that's fine. As long as you know how it works and how it gets applied, hey, that's up to you. But if you kind of go by, if you talk to anybody in our implementation, you talk to support, they're kind of used to seeing it this way because that's been our recommended practice. And like I said, for 90% of the people out there, you know what, we can configure it to kind of go around that method. But there's still 10% of people that want to do something else. Well, that's the beauty of this thing as well, is you know what, I can customize it and I can do whatever I want. As long as I know how it's getting processed, as long as I know how it's getting applied, then as soon as I get that concept, knock yourself out. So I'm not going to stand here and say, no, everybody has to do it this one way, because I'm not doing your job. You know what? I'm not paying you to do that. I'm just trying to give you the information and kind of giving you just the practices that work, that have worked and been successful, and talking to partners. It seems to be a way to go. But as long as you understand that, hey, then I'm done. I'm out of the conversation. So it's what works best for you, and just kind of knowing how everything works. If you're like, hey, well, there's no point in doing this and this when I only need this. Hey, that's great. If you're having issues, just be able to troubleshoot it and see what's going on. That's the only thing I advise.
Yes. Well, this one I'll go ahead and take care of. This is nice and short and sweet. And you may have covered it already, but how much does the third-party patching license cost? Sorry, but we teach you how to use the product. We can give you recommendations, tell you how other people use the product. We cannot tell you how much people pay for the product. So we have nothing to do with sales. I have no clue, and I have really no interest.
Talk to your account manager,
Yeah.
because I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole, because we're not involved with the pricing and any of that. So unfortunately, we show you how it works, but we don't deal with the exchanging of the monies. So
they
talk
just
to your
make sure
account
that
manager.
we tell you that it's a licensing fee.
We just say that doesn't come default. That's an extra license. Talk to your account manager. That's pretty much as far as we go with that, but they should be able to walk you through that process and let you know what's going on. I can tell you, if you had the old AppCare license and you upgraded, then you're fine. That will transfer over, and so you can get that taken care of. So,
the other question was, is everything done in the new Patch Manager, or do you have to worry about settings from the original Ignite patching tab? Do they still play a role? Not really. If you want to, you can just sit right in this Patch Manager. That's what we kind of built it for.
The only thing,
and the only thing I can think of is exceptions.
The extra data fields on the device. Right. Let's say I created extra data fields, and not necessarily Ignite, but our default deny IE8, IE9, and those deny extra data fields, those still work. So those will show up in here. You can migrate. That's what those deny groups are. The other policies, the exclude reboot window, those don't show up automatically because they're not part of the structure. But as you can see, hey, exclude patch reboot window, I can bring that group in. So all of those fields, the extra data fields, they may still exist, but they might just not be in the new Patch Manager. You may need to bring those in if you still want to use those extra data fields for Ignite specifically. But yeah, the whole process, the searchers are still there to look at the EDFs, and the groups are still being populated, but those groups may not be in here. You can see exclude patch reboot window. I brought that into mine to kind of use it as an example. It's all in here. I'm trying to think. The only thing that we kind of talked about is the patch install groups and all of the searches that are populating like these groups. If you're having issues, take a look at that search. If you're having issues of things not getting populated, take a look at the requirements of that to make sure you're meeting them. Because I do believe we're looking at the location to see if patching is enabled by default, and that was mainly for legacy people to bring all of their devices in. So you can set that, or you can remove that row from the search if you're not using that functionality. But the day and time and the custom patching, all of that is template based. And when you upgrade, if you look at your templates, you can see all my Windows Update template. You can see that my Windows Update, that is disabled, and my patch install and reboot window, those are all disabled functionality, so I don't need that anymore. So none of those settings are relevant. I think we talked about this in our webinar. If you're upgrading to the new one, what you can do, if you want to kind of start fresh, and you can see what I did for my all clients, is before I upgraded, I set everything to do not patch with a priority of 0, just in case something happens where if I'm upgrading in all of the settings, I don't want to migrate, we can just kind of take that out of the mix, is I can set all clients to do not patch with a priority of 0, and I can kind of clear out all settings when it migrates over to the new Patch Manager. This is something that support started recommending when they started talking to partners. We've kind of added that to our training here in the last few weeks, but that is something that might alleviate. Now, if you're brand new and you just turn it on for the first time, none of this is relevant. You don't need to do this. It's only people that have older versions, and it was just an extra step that support started before they flip the switch is, hey, let's go ahead and clear out all of the template settings. So just in case as they go through that migration, something, accidentally doesn't get cleared out. That was just an extra step. Just, hey, let's just make sure something doesn't go misfire in the upgrade.
Absolutely. Well, I think we have time just for this one more, and then we can wrap it up.
Keep saying that. We did one more.
One more. I swear, this is it.
Yeah.
So it's third-party patching again. And this is more of conceptual. They're just kind of looking for recommendations. A good way and easy way to select which third-party patches each customer would want, as some would like Chrome patches and others may not. So in other words, a nice selection on a customer basis. So I've never really dealt with the third-party patching like we have with the Microsoft patching. So to come up with concepts on maybe how you should structure them.
The way I do it, all right, and I've kind of talked to other people, is I'll create a Chrome, let's use Chrome as an example. I'll create a Chrome policy, and then I'll apply that policy to whoever needs it. If it's this client, I'll create a search, hey, client A, B, C, and D, hey, they get it. And then, you know what, I assign that policy. It's going to be the same thing as I do with regular, is if I have a Chrome, I'm going to create a policy, or I'm going to create that policy and I'm going to set it to install or update, however you want to do it. And then I apply that policy to who needs it. The functionality and all of that isn't going to change. You find out who needs it, what they want, and you configure it for there. So I create the policy to install Chrome, then I apply it to whoever needs it. If I have 10 clients and only 5 clients need it, you know what? I create that group that has that and I apply a policy to that group. So nothing changes with third party. I know it kind of throws a different mix in there, but we're treating it just like a regular patch. Is I find the patch, hey, if I don't need it, then I do it, and you can see here that I have my 3PP approvals, Chrome, and here I build my policy to install it. I approve it. Hey, then I assign this policy to whoever needs it. Maybe on my default that I set, you know what, I ignore it across the board, and I assign that to maybe my default group, and hey, unless I tell you otherwise, you're not going to get it. It all acts the same way as any of my other patches. I'm going to treat it the same. I only apply it to the people that need it. How do I do that? I create a policy. I assign it to the group of agents that need it. And it's nothing's different. It just kind of throws some more policies in there. But once you kind of go through here and kind of fine tune it, it really is just like any other patch, and I always kind of train that way. If I need to set up another one where here I only want to install it, but here I only want to update it, well, then I got to create 2 policies to kind of reflect that. So it's depending on, again, it all falls back. What do they want? How do I achieve that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of hard when you're talking about the third-party patching, but I mean, it's really going to be something you're going to discuss with your clients and kind of your own services and how you're really offering these. That's going to make the most sense on these group structures. But I did want to point out, we kind of talked about the fee licensing, and while we don't deal with any of the cost or anything like that, what I can say, the question has come across, is how is it applied? And that's applied by any agents that happen to have a third-party patching policy applied to them. That's going to count against that licensing on it. So that's how the counts are going to be structured on the back end for licensing.
And I can kind of show you how that works.
Yeah,
if I go to General tab, you can see that if I have third-party application, I'm going to say, hey, my license is enabled, agents in use, agents use month to date. I have that 4. Where does that 4 come from? Well, if I go to groups and I look at my column that has my third-party updates, well, I go and I see, well, okay, there's only one list of devices or one group that has that policy assigned. That's my workstations. If I open that up, I have 4 devices in there. So there's my 4 licenses. So it only applies to where you're using that policy. So that I can check the policy, hey, 4 is in use. I find out where that update policy is being applied, and hey, I can see how many devices in there, and that's where those numbers come from.
And that's it. There's nothing else to it.
All right. Ooh,
I think we've exhausted it yet again.
That was a good Q&A. I like that. Usually we have like 15, 20 minutes of questions.
Usually we're tugging them out of them, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, we know people are asking questions. Now we're like, all right, sweet.
Well, it has been a lot of fun. We actually enjoy these times when you guys can come in and engage with us and give us a lot of questions to ponder on. I just hope that everybody out there has taken away a lot of information from this series.
Yep,
and got a lot of questions answered.
And to reiterate, this is our 4th in the series,
Yes.
so if you haven't seen the other 3, they are out there. Look to the blueprint. All of that will be updated. If you haven't seen the blueprint, I highly recommend using that. And let me see if I can...
It's nobody's fault, by the way, out there. We appreciate the questions. The more the merrier.
There we go. So on our university, you can find the patch manager. This breaks down everything that's on there. I think I've mentioned this in every webinar that we've had. As we update information, you can see in the patch manager, here is part 1, part 2, part 3. We're doing part 4 now. As soon as we get this available to everybody, I'm going to add this to the list. So this is just going to be an additional resource that you can use, but use the patch manager. You can see it breaks down all 5 sections. It's got links to documentation, how-to videos, other blueprints, any videos that we have, it's all going to be right here. So if you keep this handy, you'll be able to use this as soon as we add more videos are coming, documentation updated, it's all going to be updated accordingly. So if you keep this in your favorites, all your resources are going to be here. So everything is broken down here. So hopefully if you've never seen this before, find this link. It's there. It's in our university. Bookmark it. But yeah, everything will update everything accordingly.
All right. Well, on that note, everyone have a wonderful time, and thanks for joining.
Take care, everybody.
Goodbye.